Welcome to another episode of the Plutus Awards Podcast. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through this show, we share these stories of challenges and successes, from bloggers to podcasters to writers, speakers, and more. Today's guest is Scarlett McCarthy, a freelance writer, screenwriter, and playwright. In January 2020, she founded Literally Broke, a personal finance platform for artists and creatives. We talk about Scarlett's side hustles that enabled her to pay down debt, why she eventually stepped back from some of them to focus on her blog Literally Broke, and how her freelancing helped her when she got laid off during the pandemic. Let's dive right into my conversation with Scarlett McCarthy. Scarlett, welcome to the show. Very excited to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
To start off, tell me what your former full-time gig was or job.
Formerly, I was actually just working as a post-production assistant in New York City in advertising.
You had mentioned in our communications before the show that you had built up a bunch of side hustles. So tell me what they are and why did you decide to start them?
I began side hustling when I first got out of college and had my first full-time job. And so I was always whenever any opportunities were presented to me that allowed me to make extra income outside of my full-time job, I was taking them. I did everything originally from bartending at a theater company to answering emails for different companies. So I was always just open to new opportunities to make extra money. But then when I became really, really serious about paying off my debt, I was really looking to maximize the amount of time I was actually spending at work. So there was a lot of downtime. So I was like, how can I somehow be moonlighting and doing other things too? I started doing social media management and content writing. And those were the two primary things I used to pay off a lot of debt.
Assuming that moonlighting at work didn't really negatively influence the type of work you're doing in your day job. Okay, so just to make that clear for everybody, that even if you are side hustling at your job, make sure that it's okay with your employer, right? How did you find these side hustles?
So when I first got out of college, I was doing a lot of unpaid content writing and stuff. Through those, I was able to get more formal copywriting experience. And then through having those connections, people started reaching out to me. I was always sharing my work online. So, people I knew who were in my network would be like, oh, I'm actually looking for this. And I would reach out to them and make it happen.
The height of your side hustles, how many did you have going at one time?
Oh my gosh. When I was first started paying off debt in January 2019, maybe I was doing content writing and I was also answering emails for a full-time job, my first full-time job out of college. So I was corresponding with all their users and I was doing 25 hours a week of that on top of having a full-time job. So working a ton because I was just so motivated to get rid of my credit card debt that I was I need to take on anything that's offered to me.
So I have to ask, how much debt did you end up paying off?
So that first year I increased my net worth by $15,000 and my starting salary at my full-time job was only $35,000 and I live in New York City. So it was I increased my income by $13,000 that year just by side hustling.
Wow, that's amazing. So I know a lot of listeners are probably doing side hustles and the full-time job and hopefully transitioning, all those things, right? Tell me, what would you say would be the biggest challenge for you in terms of juggling all of those things?
I think there definitely comes a point of burnout where you do have to, after a certain point, I really couldn't maintain that same level of working after 1 year. So this year I really did slow down. I was still doing one or two side hustles when they presented themselves, but I wasn't really taking on as much. And also I made an effort to start spending money more normally again once my credit card debt was gone. So you can only really be the gazelle intense, what people say. You can only really do that for so long, I think, before it becomes unsustainable.
Are there any boundaries that you have now related to work in terms of the hours or the type of work you'll do?
Definitely. I think I used to take on things even if they didn't pay that much because I thought any income was good. And now I definitely weigh things more heavily and think about if that's actually something that money incentive is worth my time, or if it doesn't benefit my career or pay well, then I'm not going to take it on.
Can you tell me a bit more about that?
There was I had an opportunity earlier this summer to start writing for this new company that was forming and making content for them on their blog. It was a job 3 years ago I would have been really excited to be offered, but it only paid $75 an article for like 500 words. If something requires research and takes a lot of time, that $75 quickly becomes really small when you're talking about freelance taxes and the hourly like work that would have to go into it. I decided that even though I was excited about the company, it just really wasn't worth it, especially because they weren't able to negotiate with me.
Talking about like an incentive. So if something was lower paying or not your usual rate, so to speak, what kind of incentives would you consider that, like you said, help to further your career or to grow your career, so to speak?
I think that especially when you're first getting started, it's important to take on things, especially like in content, that maybe don't pay as well, but help build your portfolio. So that's something I think about a lot. If like a huge company reached out to me tomorrow, if it isn't paying that much, I might consider it in the sense that that company might be really good on my portfolio, really good on a resume. And so really thinking through that. And then also if there are any benefits offered. One of the reasons I actually took the full-time job I did have, even though it wasn't paid very much, was because there was an option for overtime and also free lunch and breakfast every day, which helped me in paying off my debt tremendously. It was not having to really worry about those groceries. I think it's important to weigh like the entirety of a situation before deciding anything.
In 2020, you mentioned you scaled down your side hustles. What were they exactly?
Previous to that, I had been doing Poshmark. In addition to like the content kind of stuff I was doing, I was also doing Poshmark. I was trying to sell things on Craigslist. And I was just working so much overtime. And anytime overtime was offered to me, I was taking it. I was working weekends. There were just times where I was working like so much every week and just hadn't had a day off in weeks because I was working in advertising where it is typically just a lot. Beginning of this year, I started really being like, okay, like I need to like have a life and see friends and relax and also to focus on my own writing. And then I think starting the blog also helped me because I began literally broke at the beginning of this year. Knowing that I had to also put time into that each week made it easy to kind of be like, okay, like where are my priorities and how can they shift to accommodate the new projects I've taken on and what my values now are.
Would you say starting your blog has helped you with getting freelance writing gigs or at least network more?
Definitely. At the beginning of this year, once I launched my blog, that's when I began doing the better paying content writing I'm now doing. As a result of it, I got better at it. Now I have like a portfolio of writing that's like so much better. I just had my first byline like in a magazine, like an online magazine. I was actually looking back at my blog the other day and realizing like I'm just such a better writer. I know so much more about SEO. I'm so much more specialized in this field now that I feel really confident kind of going into situations and talking about these positions and jobs and opportunities.
What are some of the habits or what were some of the things that you were teaching yourself when you launched your blog to help you become a better writer other than the SEO stuff?
I mean, I've read so many books on blogging, and I think also just beginning to read more blogs and really think about what are people actually asking, and knowing my audience was so important. I was kind of writing what I wanted and not thinking about an audience so much, which is great. And there's definitely a room for that. But looking back at my early blog posts, I don't know who they were helping really, or like what they were serving. So I think really focusing on how can I serve or entertain or educate has really shifted the blog away from being about me to how can it like impact other people.
So in terms of freelance writing, was that a goal for your blog that you wanted to build up enough of a reputation that you can get gigs? Or were you looking at your blog to stand on its own to earn money through, let's say, courses and things like that?
I think I had a really skewed idea of how easy it was to monetize a blog. I think if you read like the 4-Hour Workweek or whatever, you're like, this is the best idea ever. I'm going to make so much money. And so I think maybe that was part of it. I think I really had this like glorified idea of like becoming a digital nomad and whatever. It was good because I think in some ways you sometimes kind of need like that lofty goal in order to actually just get started. But then realizing that like most people like don't monetize their blogs in that way where they can just like live off them forever. And if they do, it takes a long time and a lot of work. Really becoming like actually understanding like the blogging world is not really something you can do until you actually just start. But I definitely started getting more contacts and being able to write better more quickly so I could take on higher paying jobs and also take on more of them. It's a good portfolio piece for sure.
And at that point, with your freelance writing your blog, were you ever considering turning it into a full-time venture? Was that a goal that you had in mind, or were you just really happy with it being a side hustle for now?
I think it was definitely my goal to turn it into something full time. Now I don't know that that's really my goal. I think I am interested maybe in more pursuing like a journalism route. I'm like along for the ride, I think right now. I'm not really, I realize like when I focus too heavily on one goal, I think that I kind of close myself off to like the other opportunities that are coming out of it. I've just been kind of focusing on just maintaining it and actually sticking with blogging because that's super hard and taking on all the opportunities that come alongside it.
So speaking about going along with the ride, I mean, 2020, I think for everybody has been very, I'm going to air quote this, special. Tell me what happened with your job then.
I was working from home for the first like month or so of the pandemic. And then I got an email, I think, that I was furloughed. And I was like, okay, I kind of expected as much because I was an assistant. I helped with a lot of expenses. But seeing as we were all now working from home, the expenses had shifted radically. So people were no longer ordering lunches or buying office supplies and buying equipment, like the typical things I had been involved in. I very quickly was like, yeah, I'm probably going to get furloughed. Most of my friends by that point had been furloughed from their jobs. So I just kind of knew it was definitely going to happen. And I stopped really spending money. I was saving more because I knew that was coming. But actually within a week of getting furloughed, then I was brought back, which was kind of weird. So basically for 3 months, I was kind of just like hanging out and getting paid because I believe my company had gotten like the government assistance. So they had like hired me back, but I didn't have like a huge workload. So at that point, I started really like leaning into my side hustles because I knew that the pandemic relief, I forget what it's called, but like it was only like a 2-month time period. So I kind of knew like at the end of those 2 months, I was probably going to get laid off unless for some reason like the pandemic was over. But also in May at that point, like we still didn't really understand this was going to be a year or longer of this year, the never ending 2020. And I just began to take on more to keep side hustling. And I was really just focused on saving. And then in July, I was officially laid off just as I was moving into like a more expensive apartment. I kind of knew this was a gamble, but my fiance and I have been living in this really tiny apartment for years. And while we were both working outside of the house and really only were home like a few hours in the night each night, it had been fine because it was really affordable and inexpensive. But we definitely were like, we can't keep doing this. So I was moving into a new apartment. It was kind of crazy.
I can only imagine. Let's talk a little bit, because it sounds like it was kind of a roller coaster for a few months. Or like, okay, you were furloughed, you knew that, but then you were back on, but then you were like, I don't know if I'm still going to have this job. It was almost like sitting on this potential news that you were basically going to get laid off. And so tell me a story of where you just felt so overwhelmed and like why you felt overwhelmed and what did you do about it?
I mean, I think for a long time, I felt like there was really nothing to do but save money and kind of get my ducks in order so that when that time came that I was laid off, because I kind of knew it was imminent, that I would be okay and have a few months of savings that I could support myself with if I had to go on unemployment and look for work and stuff. But it was also very weird because I was making less at my job than I would have on unemployment. I was kind of like, I wish I had just been laid off like originally when it happened because I would have been making double my income. I was just like I was like very bitter and angry. And I just remember in that period of time going on like a ton of walks and crying a lot because I felt we were in our really small apartment. And I was just like, my fiance and I are both writers. So being there while he's writing with his writing partner and talking. And I was just like, I'm losing my mind and something needs to change.
Yeah, I get it. I think for so many people, and this is anecdotally, I don't want to kind of say this is like true for everybody, but for many people, I think getting unemployment at that point in time would have been probably more than what their salary was making. Pivoting back to your side hustles, at this point, actually before you even got the notice that you were going to be furloughed, what was your freelancing side hustle like? Was it pretty profitable? Like, was it a huge portion of your side hustle earnings? Like, tell me a bit more about that.
Social media management, I was making like an extra $1,000 a month. And at that point, I had been putting all of that money just onto my debt or into my savings. Like that was all going towards my financial goals. I wasn't living on it at all. But then once the pandemic began, I just began putting all of it into my savings because I knew that like I needed a bigger emergency fund because I'd been paying off debt for so long that I had been kind of doing both things at once, like saving and paying off debt. But once the pandemic began, I really just was like, I can't focus on paying off debt which is now just my student loans. And because of like the interest freeze, I realized that like it wasn't that important that I prioritized physical, but like building my savings was. So I began putting all that money there. And then content writing, I was getting like things, it was never like really routine until this year. So I started getting 4 blogs a month or whatever. And I was also putting all of that money into my savings just so that I had it for this like future layoff situation.
Tell me when you decided to really kind of like put the pedal to the metal in terms of like, okay, I really now to ramp up my freelance writing and social media management stuff.
I started realizing that I think I'm someone who's a little bit shy of like posting on LinkedIn or posting on Facebook and being like, I'm taking on clients. But I realized that I really just needed to tell everyone what I was doing. Luckily, because I went to school for writing and just have connections through the copy work I have done, I have been getting more work. I will say like the freelancing I had been doing was all e-commerce related. So those companies continued to need new blog posts and they were all looking to like target certain kinds of pandemic related topics. So like, for instance, I'm currently doing content writing for a toilet paper company. Obviously, they really needed more SEO content and also have the business set up to continue to run right now. Luckily, the stars kind of aligned at that front where I was already doing like remote side hustles. If I had been, still like bartending at the theater company I had been bartending at, that wouldn't have been a good situation. But luckily, I had been really focused on, I was really interested in at the end of 2019 in kind of having this like remote life in general, which is why I started the blog in the first place. So it kind of worked out that I had like income streams that were like, location independent and didn't need me in there in person.
And are you hoping to just continue with freelance writing, like becoming you are a full-time freelance writer right now. Are you just hoping to continue that or are you still looking for a job?
I'm not really applying to jobs actively because I am making money and also I feel like comfortable where I am right now. And I feel like throwing any more craziness into the mix is something I'm trying to avoid. But when I do get reached out to for jobs through recruiters or people in HR at certain companies, and I feel excited about the company and I feel like I could actually like work with them well, I have been going through the interview process. But I definitely went through like some really bad interviews when I was first laid off where I was getting to like the final rounds and then they wanted someone with more experience. This happened like 4 times. And I was like, I kind of can't keep going through this when I don't actually like need this income as badly as like, if I really needed it, I would 100% keep applying. It was just kind of like too much mental energy and strain and stress.
So it sounds like it's kind of like a boundary that you're putting or you've put in place to preserve your mental health in a way.
I think I take rejection really, really bad, which is something I'm continuing to work on. But I realized that like I really couldn't keep thinking like, oh, this job is going to happen and then everything will be fine because everyone's looking for work right now and it's really competitive.
It's so funny that you mentioned you're bad with rejection because I feel like that's a nature of side hustling and freelancing. So were there any times where you tried to apply for a freelance writing gig and you essentially got rejected or it didn't work out?
I mean, I've definitely been trying to pitch more. So I've pitched to like a number of publications with like kind of personal finance related content that I think their audiences like. And I've been rejected so many times. It definitely sucks, but I am like a writer outside of this and I'm like a playwright and screenwriter. So rejection is something I'm already very intimate with, but unfortunately, I still just don't handle it well. But I think the more you get rejected, the better it is getting. And I think I am learning. And I think that is part of the process of freelancing is kind of learning to like not take things personally. And when you do have a win, like it feels good.
Tell me a bit about some of okay, I suppose this is hard because again, 2020, right? But tell me some of the ways that you try to manage like a bit of a work-life balance. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for many people as they transition from a 9-to-5 to a full-time freelancing gig or entrepreneurship gig. So tell me some of the things that you've done.
It's definitely been like touch and go. I mean, some weeks I feel like I'm so productive and then others I feel like I'm a mess. But something I've been trying to do is I'm working with a lot of the main company I'm working with now on like a 20-hour per week basis is on the West Coast. So what I've been kind of doing is not really starting to work on that stuff and my freelance stuff until about 1 p.m. East Coast time, which is nice because it gives me the morning to kind of focus on my own projects. If I want to post on Literally Broke's Instagram or write a blog, I can do that. If I want to do something else, I can do that in the morning. And just kind of giving myself that flexibility has been helpful, because I think expecting myself to work like 8 hours a day from home in a succession is just not really realistic given the current climate. I just think I'm trying to be more flexible with myself around like my mental health and being like, if I just get like 4 hours of paid work done a day, that's okay. And I don't have to make a ton of money this year and like fix my student loans, right? I just think that realizing that maybe my financial goals wouldn't happen this year if I also wanted to balance mental health. And that's kind of been really helpful, I think. It's just realizing like I don't have to like be an amazing like headline.
That's so true. It sounds like you're trying to balance your ambition, so to speak, but with like sort of present stuff, right? Like, so like presently you don't need to earn this much money. You would like to grow it, but that's not really a big concern maybe until the next year or a couple months down the line.
I just think 2020 has really been so crazy. And if I actually sit down and think about like how much has happened and changed and whatever, it's like, yeah, at the beginning of this year when I started Literally Broke, I thought I'd be like net worth positive by the end of this year. I'm sure, you know, if I hadn't gone to Starbucks or spent money on Amazon, maybe like I could have been. But also like our lives have just changed so drastically that I've been trying to give myself more grace, which is hard because I'm traditionally very hard on myself. But I have been trying to just be like kinder to myself and realizing that like it's okay. I'm doing enough right now. And like when things are normal again, whatever that means, I can focus on those goals and really go after them.
Well, Scarlett, thank you so much for these amazing insights. Like, where can everyone find you online?
My website is literallybroke.com. You can also find me on Instagram, where I love to be, at Literally Broke Blog. And then I'm also launching a podcast called Bachelornomics this January, where it's going to be about The Bachelor and money. My two favorite topics.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I will subscribe. I cannot wait.
I'm very excited. So yeah, everyone should definitely subscribe.
Awesome. Well, again, Scarlett, thank you so much for coming on the Plutus Awards podcast.
Thank you so much for having me and speaking with me, Sarah.
Thanks for tuning in. Let's take a look at some lessons we can learn from my conversation with Scarlett. Lesson number 1 is don't be afraid to try many side hustles, but make a plan to transition to more sustainable work. Now, for Scarlett, she knew that there was an end in sight. She really only hustled so much for about a year or so until she paid off that huge chunk of debt. And she knew in the back of her mind that when she started, she wasn't going to do this for long because it just wasn't sustainable. Now, while it's great to want to pay off a huge chunk of debt or achieve a massive financial goal, really take care of your mental, physical, and emotional health. So if you do decide to go all in on side hustles and your full-time job or whatever that may look like, ensure that you do have an exit plan so that you don't end up burning out. Lesson number 2 is to create a space for downtime from work. Now, this could be a physical space, or this could be some form of space where you can signal to yourself that, okay, it's time to turn off my brain from work. So, for instance, maybe you can hide your laptop in your closet so that you know that it is time for rest and relaxation or personal time with friends. Or you can light a candle to signal the beginning of work time. Whatever that is, especially if you're working from home, whether it's from your full-time job or freelancing, having some form of separation is really going to help you. Lesson number 3 is it's okay not to feel the need to hustle or to constantly grow in your business. For many people, 2020 was a very difficult year, myself included. And so many of us are really left thinking about some of our goals for 2021 and beyond. And some of that may look like just sustaining what you've already got or rebuilding what you've lost. Now, for Scarlett, she's okay to be where she is at because she is able to sustain her income to help her pay rent and all of those things. And she's fine with that. Maybe at a later time, she's going to reassess her goals. And if that's where you are, that's okay. When you're in business, it doesn't mean you have to constantly double, triple, 10x, all of the things. It just means to be able to create a business and a life that works for you. And if it means right now you just want to maintain your income, you need to take a step back, or you just want to reassess what you've been doing this entire time, that's perfectly okay. Again, it is your business. It is your side hustle, whatever that is right now. You make it work for you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and thank you so much for listening to the Plutus Awards Podcast. If you're interested in collaborating with other financial bloggers, podcasters, influencers, and more to chat about your work, interests, ask and answer questions, come join our Facebook community. Search for Plutus Community in the search bar or head to facebook.com/groups/Plutus Community. We hope to see you there and get a chance to support you and your amazing work.